friend.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Hello, everybody. I'm Mike Pittman joining you again. I'm host of the Real Michael Pittman Podcast. And joining me on the show today is a person that I've had the opportunity of known for quite some time. He resides in St. Louis. His name is Paul McKee, probably no stranger to those in the St. Louis area. Paul has been involved in a lot of stuff over the years. He was a top-notch developer in St. Louis County, and I'll let him kind of tell you a little bit about that. And he also took on a project which I felt was a major project, and I know he's still fighting to get through that project. But Paul, thank you for agreeing to come on the show with me, and I'll just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about who Paul McKee is.
Sure. Well, thanks, Mike. Anything for you, as you know. And I'm a real estate developer. I'm an engineer by training. I grew up in the construction business and started a company called Parrot Corporation here in St. Louis. My son now owns and runs. And also had another firm called Environmental Management, where we operated water and wastewater treatment plants all over the country and sold that to British Oxygen, and kept the real estate business that's called M Property Services today. And our mission is to create community where business and community can take place. And we developed WingHaven here in O'Fallon, Missouri, where I'm sitting right now. We started that over 20 plus years ago with McBride and Son and Tom Dunn from Fred Weber at that time. It's a very successful 1,200 acre mixed use development in the home of MasterCard International. And sort of pride myself on being able to find companies like MasterCard and win them for a particular community. I call it hunting jobs. That's my number one job. And then with Bob Clark, jointly developed in North County at Hanley and 170 at NorthPark, where it's the home of Express Scripts. And today, Schnucks and Amazon and many other things. It's very, very successful mixed use or light industrial and office project up by the airport. And then 22 years ago, embarked on land in the city of St. Louis on the north side and started buying land and set up what's called north side regeneration to bring jobs and redevelopment to the north side of the city of St. Louis.
Yeah, and that's the project that I've come to know you by, and we, like I said, we were just chatting before we started that. I met you through a mutual friend, a close friend of mine who's passed on, Demetrius Johnson, which was a shocker when that happened, because Demetrius and I had been friends. Oh my goodness, over 40 years, dating back to growing up in projects in South St. Louis, and that was total shock when that happened. I know it was a big loss for the city of St. Louis as well. So it was just, and I still think about it even to this day, the impact that he had on St. Louis and the kids and lives that he impacted. So it's a big loss for St. Louis, but DJ was the one that brought us together. And then later was Rodney Hubbard. I believe Rodney is still in the St. Louis area lobbying or doing something like that. So it's been a while since I've had an opportunity to talk to him. But what intrigued me about your project, and at the time I was a newspaper publisher, and I believe we did a story on your project. I remember driving out to St. Louis, meeting with you and your wife Midge, and we did the story. And from a person that's done some development, not at the scale that you've done it on, and having lived in North St. Louis, having grown up living in North St. Louis as well, I realized the difficulty in the project such as that, and in terms of the mass amount of development that you wanted to do. And I know when we met, talked on about, I think it was 2009, I believe it was when we first met.
Wow.
And you talked about it, and how you were acquiring land in North St. Louis, and how I guess you had your critics, I guess, on your particular side of the fence, for people saying, hey, why are you going over there? Why are you buying land in North St. Louis in a predominantly black area, which is now St. Louis, probably 98.5%, Black or African American. And when you could have just kind of sat back on your laurels, you had completed, millions of dollars in terms of square footage and price and development, out in St. Louis County. And, I guess the question still remains, what did you see in North St. Louis from a development standpoint that nobody else saw, if you will, outside of, not being any development that has taken place, any major developments that have taken place to the scale of what you're talking about doing? So what was your initial thought process in terms of putting something together for North St. Louis?
Well, I think there's two major components to that. One is once you reach the age of what's known as the OG, the old guy, and you've got $1 or $2 and you've made enough mistakes in life that you got a little bit of wisdom. Everybody thinks you should go play golf or go to the beach or, do something like that. And I didn't fit that MO. That really was not me. And the second part of that is the city has been very, very good and generous to my wife and I. This community has been, and to my family. And it's very important to me. And I wanted to continue to contribute so that my kids and grandkids would continue to thrive here, among other things. And the third thing is my roots are in the north side. My wife actually, my mom grew up on the 3500 block of North Market and went to Catholic school at St. Matthew's on the north side. So I have roots here. So those things were really at the basis of it, and decided that if something had to be done, it had to be major. It couldn't be, I used the analogy, you can't throw pebbles on the end of a lake and expect the ripples to get to the other side. So it's got to be large enough to make a big enough splash that it'll affect many. Well, fortunately, we've been able to do that. It's just taken longer than I thought and a lot more money than I ever dreamed of. But when the city and us won the National Geospatial Agency's $1.75 billion project to go on 100 acres right in the middle of our Northside regeneration, that was a game changer. And that agreement was signed in 2016. And that wouldn't have happened without the state of Missouri's help with what was called the Distress Area Land Assemblage Tax Credit that gave us the ability to accumulate the land to be able to accommodate the NGA. And it also wouldn't have happened without the state of Missouri contributing to win the jobs for the NGA. And today, the NGA, the building itself is 99% complete. And they are installing all of the interior equipment for the next 2 years. The exterior site work still got a lot of work to be done. And then in August of 2025, they begin moving people in. And by the end of the year, January 1 of 26, 100% of NGA will be operative here in the middle of the north side of the city of St. Louis, which is a real game changer.
Yeah. And I would say that's probably the major catalyst when you take a project of that size and the amount of, I'm assuming the type of jobs that it's going to bring is probably, the major catalyst as relates to, that whole project even in itself. And I know it's been a long haul. I'm not here to beat you up because I think the other newspapers do a pretty good job of that. But right. I just wanted you to have an opportunity to tell your side of the story and the things that you have encountered. And I know the mass amount of money that you've probably spent over the years, trying to get this project off the ground, the scrutiny that you had to endure. And it's something I'm assuming that probably most people don't realize. You didn't have to do this. You could have kept your money and just, like you said, went out and played golf every day and let somebody else do it. It's one of those things that everybody talks about, hey, what we need, but when you start talking about people stepping up to the plate, it's a little bit different story. And there have been some that have done some things. I don't want to discount everything in North St. Louis, but on the scale that you've actually talked about doing, I'm not familiar with anybody that has put such a massive project together and then taken all the body shots, over the years. And, I know that the city of St. Louis kind of worked with you, and then there were some issues there in terms of them pulling back the state of Missouri. And I just can't even imagine the major financial strain this has had on you, just, trying to keep this project afloat, and for to have the Spy Center to come through, I'm sure is going to help, to really to move some things along. And toward that end, what other developments have taken place or on the horizon that you can see that will come about as a result of this project nearing its completion?
That's great. We did a study, it's almost 12 years old now, and there were 5 basic deserts on the north side. There was no healthcare within the community. There was no food. The closest supermarket was 7.5 miles. The energy, had all kinds of trouble with the energy. Would go off and on. It'd drop about every 10 days to 2 weeks. Obviously, security was an issue, and no jobs. So out of those 5 areas, we said we got to attack those first. So the first thing we attacked was food, because there were no places to shop, and we couldn't convince anybody else to do it. So we did it ourselves and opened up what's called Greenleaf Market, along with a Zoom C-store across the street, and knowing that the Zoom would do well to help support the Greenleaf Market. We've really struggled with the Greenleaf Market. I'm on my 3rd operator, and I think we finally have found a very wise OG African-American fellow that really knows how to operate a supermarket. And this is really not a supermarket, it's a neighborhood grocery. And he has been involved now for about 3.5, 4 months, and I really believe he's going to turn the market around and was going to deliver food and fresh food and prepared food every day. So we attacked that first. The second thing is the Pruitt-Igoe site health and healthcare. So we were very, very fortunate to create a relationship with Dr. David Lenahan, who is the CEO and principal owner of Ponce Health Sciences University, which is an MD school headquartered in Ponce, Puerto Rico. And fortunately, Dr. Lenahan's wife is from St. Louis, and we wanted to create a new med school here in St. Louis. And to do that, you got to have clinical space. And he and I have been 10 years of trying to get that done. And finally, in 2018, David opened up his med school up here and started what's called an MS program, Masters of Medical Science. And what he does is he averages over 45% of economically distressed families in his med school, which obviously means way more people of color, all kinds of color. And today in Puerto Rico and in North America, no one creates more Hispanic speaking doctors than Ponce Health Science University out of Ponce, Puerto Rico. So he started here in 2018. It took us until 2021 before David got the LCME's approval to expand his medical school up here, which was our original goal. And in the process, we have built him a new $100 million academic building in Puerto Rico, which we will replicate up here. So the way we are approaching health, which is the second determinant, was to create an academic healthcare campus on the Pruitt-Igoe site, on the southern half of the Pruitt-Igoe site, which would include a hospital, a full service hospital, a med school, research, student housing, everything involved with an academic healthcare campus. That has been quite a journey. And then we had to go to state of Missouri and get a certificate of need for a hospital, which we did. And when we first started that, the location of it was right in the middle of the site where the NGA is today. So we had to move it. That whole process took a couple of years, believe it or not. And as of right now, the phase one of the Homer G. Phillips Memorial Hospital is completed, and we've passed the first licensure issues. We hope to finish that today or tomorrow and literally open up the hospital to the public either Friday or Monday as we speak. And that facility has 15 full service ER beds, emergency room beds, and 2 specialty beds. So it's a 24/7 ER facility, 3 overnight full hospital rooms, beds. And then it's got full imaging, everything from x-ray to CAT scan to MRI services. And that's phase one of a multi-phase academic healthcare campus. And today, Dr. Lenahan's med school is in its second year here. So every year he adds more students, and eventually he'll have a school of 450 doctors being trained in the middle of the north side, of which 45% plus or minus are of economically distressed families coming into his med school. So the whole goal is to train people that will go back and work in their own community, and that's what we're up to. That's built right across the street from NGA. And then following that will come the rest of the development of the Pruitt-Igoe site. And by 2025, mid-year, end of year, between NGA, the hospital, the med school, other items we have planned, there'll be over 5,000 jobs at the intersection of Jefferson and Cass. And those 5,000 jobs, the rule of thumb is every 1.8 new job created creates a new household. You work the math backwards, and then you decide what percentage you think of these people may live on the north side. I think we need somewhere between 750 and 1,200 new living units, everything from apartments to duplexes to single family housing, to be done and created in and around the north side by January 1 of 2026. That's not something we do, so we're encouraging the residential development to start taking place now that the jobs are becoming a fruition. So it's enough to keep me on my knees and out of the taverns, or maybe in the taverns every now and then, Mike.
Yeah, and talking about the hospital, I know there was you have been catching a lot of flack down there, mainly because of the name. The name at Homer G. Phillips Hospital. For those listeners I'm from St. Louis, this was a historical. Matter of fact, I think it was the first Black hospital in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, or first. It was one of the first. I don't know if it's because of the west of the Mississippi, but it was historically Homer G. Phillips Hospital used to have 2, city number 1 and city number 2. And Homer G. Phillips was number 2. Hospital number 1 was on Lafayette, which now I believe were probably condos, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, senior living.
Yeah, senior living, yeah. So there was some in the community that felt that this was disrespectful to name at Homer G. Phillips. What do you say to those critics?
Well, a couple things. One is the younger people today, younger than me and you, didn't even know who Homer G. was or Homer G. Phillips Hospital. Even in the Black community, Mike, it always surprises me. They hear about it, they knew about it, but it was renowned. There were 3 places in the United States where a person of color could train to be a doctor or nurse. Homer G. Phillips here in St. Louis, Mahaffey in Nashville, and Howard in Washington, D.C. So if you think about that, a third of the doctors my age, which is senior citizens age, I'd say, or OG stage, were trained in St. Louis at Homer G., and they closed it. Well, the Black community never did get over that, and rightfully so. And when we talked about doing a new academic healthcare campus and having a hospital, pardon me, the idea of recreating that kind of environment. And our non-profit board has an African-American by the name of Daryl Piggy, who I think you know, sitting on it.
I played basketball at Northwest High School years ago.
Pardon me, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I remember him.
Said there's only one name for this facility, and it's Homer G. Phillips. So we knew we would take some flack over that, but said we must embrace that heritage, particularly in the Black community and for this community. So that's the origin of it. Daryl named it. We've stuck by it, and we are going to stick by it. And a lot of people just think it's an urgent care center. That's crazy. It's a full service academic healthcare campus.
Yeah. Now, also, you talked about the grocery store, and this is historic all over the country and pretty much economically depressed areas where you have food deserts, where you don't have access to fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. You have convenience stores that, you know, items that aren't good for the Black community, potato chips, you know, all the things that aren't good for us, which is one of the reasons why, you know, our healthcare is probably at the bottom of the barrel as it relates to other populations in the United States. So, you know, hats off to you to doing that. I know there's a lady in Chicago that I spoke with that she's getting ready to open up one of the first grocery stores. I can't believe it. I don't know if it's in the west side of Chicago or south side. There's also a group in Detroit, Michigan that's also getting ready to do the same thing. So, you know, I think in essence, you know, you are probably ahead of your time in a lot of ways that you think, and try to get people to catch up with you just because you're steady moving forward. Don't seem like they ever get an opportunity to catch up. I get it and I understand, and I'm not trying to pacify you or, you know, trying to butter up to you, but I just understand what it is that what you're trying to do in the area, and it's the massive risk that you have taken there. Let's talk a little bit about the when you talked about the housing development. And, you know, housing development is so needed all throughout the country, and especially in Black communities, because this is one of the number one ways that Black people, you know, build wealth is through home ownership. And over the years, you know, years ago, you know, a lot of Black soldiers coming back from the war were denied GI loans, which in essence, they weren't able to buy houses and weren't able to pass on wealth to their children in that regard, which is why one of the reasons I believe that we have such a wide gap as it relates to net worth of whites and Blacks in this country. Having said that, when this particular project is completed, how do you feel, or do you feel this will be a project where gentrification will take place? Now, predominantly Black, you know, for decades back, even when my mother was a kid, they owned a restaurant on Eastern Avenue. It used to be called the three-way Inn. They shut it down in the late 50s, but my mother worked there as a teenager, and it was a place that provided jobs for the family. There were individuals that came from down south that would come up that they were able to, you know, provide jobs, and it was my grandmother, or really my great-grandmother, that had it, and they couldn't read or write, but they could cook and count, and they were able to you know, to have some things that most people didn't have back then, mainly because of the restaurant. So do you think that, in your opinion, that because of this project, and probably the individuals that will probably working there, which will probably be in the tech field, that you're going to have gentrification, whereby a lot of Blacks that had been there now will be priced out? What's your thoughts on that? Because I know that was one of the initial fears that a lot of people had when your project was first announced years ago.
If that happens, it's a failure, Mike. Yeah, that's the only way to say it. So if it's all white, it's a failure. If it's all Black, it's a failure. So to me, it's got to be. But I'd like to go back, if I can, to the grocery store.
Sure. Because
over the last 22 years, I've really learned some lessons the hard way. We white people and Black people think we really understand each other, and we like to think we do. But I got to tell you, we created a grocery store the way a white community would do a grocery store, and it didn't work. It took this OG African American guy to walk in the store and said, "You've done all this all wrong. That's not the way we shop. That's not what we buy. we do this and this and this and this for. I thought, where the hell were you 10 years ago? But it was, and Daryl Piggy has actually been taking Glenn and I and a few others in the community and sort of grabbed us by the collar and drug us into the community in a different kind of way and said, you think you know how to do all this, but you may know how to do it in WingHaven, but it ain't the same. In the Black community, we don't do things the same way. And by the way, Piggy's family is the fourth generation of the NBC Bar and Lounge. It's the oldest African-American bar west of the Mississippi. So it's the same history as your mom, is how that happened, because it was the only place that Black police and firemen would go to have a drink afterwards, after work and talk. That's still open. So what I'm telling you is Dr. Lenahan calls it cultural competency in healthcare. How you treat an Indian family, a Black family, a Muslim family, a white family is different. A Hispanic family. Well, when you develop, we think a grocery store is a grocery store, right? A school is a school, a hospital's it's not all the same. And it's taken me a hell of a lesson. And you can't read this stuff anywhere. What we've tried to do is to find people in the community that can help interpret for us how to do stuff. Well, I'm not going to make that mistake in housing, so I can go find white residential developers to come down and build what we build in the suburbs or other parts of St. Louis, but that may not be what the community wants. I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I've been trying to search out and to help somehow to generate that residential community in a way that satisfies the community. Yet we have something to bring to that table too, as well. I think we know how to integrate jobs and the mixed use, and we got to bring restaurants back. We got to bring, there's going to be people working at the NGA and the hospital, and the med school. They're going to be working 24/7, 365 days a year. They're going to want to buy a hamburger, or they're going to want to buy fuel on the way home, or a loaf of bread. They got to have. So all of those services somehow need to be back in the community, Mike. Well, and if you remember when you grew up, there was a whole Black economy. Your mom had the restaurant, or somebody else had the market, and you all shopped and dealt with each other. That doesn't exist anymore, so somehow we're trying to integrate two different ways of business to take place in the community. The other thing that is so obvious to me now, this red line BS is so real in the residential community. There's a reason why African-American home ownership hasn't been able to grow, and it's because we haven't let it grow in the way our lending works, the way, it's called comparables. This. You know enough about the real estate business. There's got to be comparables to satisfy a loan for a home. So there ain't no cops in this community. All right. So it doesn't work. So that's essentially saying sorry, right? Well, that same thing happened to me in the development world. You know that. If there ain't no cops, there ain't no loan. And that's not the way real estate operates. So breaking down those barriers has been incredible. And it still exists. As I speak to you today, it still exists. So it's one thing finding the right residential developer. It's another thing to be able to create the environment where people of color, anybody, can have the home ownership and be able to borrow the money to own a home, which is my passion here. That's to create wealth in this community.
Yeah. One of the things when you talked about the home ownership, and, we did a small development here in Springfield, Illinois, housing development over 20 years ago. And we ran into one of the same issues when we were building the houses in the economically depressed area. There weren't any comparable sales. And we really had to lean on the appraisers to basically go outside of stay within the track, but still be able to go outside those particular areas and find comparable sales. And once we got, 4 or 5 houses built, we were able to establish at that point, and a track record of homes selling at a certain dollar amount. But, it took a lot of work even to get that happening, to get the first one off the ground, even though an individual might be, approved for a loan that's $150,000, but the bank is only going to loan a certain percentage. So if they say that house is only worth $120,000, but it costs you $150 to build it, nobody's going to bring $30,000 to the table just to get even. And so, to try to work around that, it's probably been one of the things that has plagued not only this area, but other areas throughout the country. My thing on that is that there needs to be some sort of partnership. Now, be it if it's with the particular cities that they're in, where they're buy downs. And then when that happens as well, because as you know, residential development, you really don't have a lot of union builders that are doing residential development. They like to really concentrate on the commercial development. But when those funds are used that come through government, then Davis-Bacon is attached to that. Now, all of a sudden, the price goes up on a residential house, which now, puts it back out of the market again. So I'm not sure exactly outside of, I've always stated that, really some of the big churches really need to get involved and pool their dollars and resources together to whereby they can create their own bank and be able to do these things and be able to, knock down some of these issues and problems. I mean, there are some pastors that are doing it throughout the country, but the scale on which is needed in our community it really needs to be done. And again, I think that's probably going to be one of the big hurdles that you'll have to overcome. But I think if you're able to do that, I think that you'll see everything else. And it's just my opinion, that you'll see everything else fall into place.
You're right on that. And that solution is like the OG that walked me into the store and said, "This is not how we shop." Well, that's not how you're going to have black ownership, is not the way it's done in most places. That ain't going to work here. So we're going to have to figure out how to do it a different way. The other one, that when Albon was involved with the Carpenters Union worked with the residential builders here and put a ton of money into home mortgages, called Prolo. And they were going to help up here, but that sort of disappeared. So there's got to be a way of solving this, Mike. And what I'm telling you is it's not something I'm going to impose, just go do. It's because I'm not going to do that again. We're going to figure out how within the black community we can do it to where people can do what we think they can do. The one thing that will demand is the variety of housing, everything from apartments to duplexes to triplexes to small, medium, and large family home ownership. We want to do that and make sure we design and manage the urban neighborhood in a culture that really makes sense in the mixed use basis, so we can bring jobs along with it. All right, that's going to be our role. And I think we can help on the financing side of some of this as well. But it's you got to remember, in this 22 years we went through and you certainly remember this, and I remember you and I talking about it. We went through the 2008 to 2015 debacle in real estate, which was miserable. And then we've gone through COVID, and now we're through another section of financial distress, with rates being where they are. So it's this ever-changing world just sort of compounds it. So everybody asked me, why aren't you moving faster? Well, I said, who's behind me? Who's in second? Exactly. I don't see anybody else pushing me, right, to come up here and do something. So that's usually my reaction to it.
Yeah. One of the things when you talked about housing, which is I just received something from my son. He sent me, they talked about Houston, Texas, the housing market in Houston, Texas, which is the hottest housing market in the country in terms of the development and the housing that they have built. I mean, they have these national builders that'll go in and buy 400 or 500 acre tracts and build 700, 800, 900, 1,000 houses at a time. And but one of the things, and they're able to get some economy of scale when you're able to do that. You can, you can kind of beat down a lot of your costs. But one of the things that's really big, at least in that particular area, and I'm assuming it's catching on throughout the country on new construction, is next gen housing, or we used to call it back then mother-in-law quarters. As population ages, and people want to be around their parents, and don't want to put them in a nursing home and don't want to be far away from them. That seems to be something that's catching on in terms of people building houses with quarters that they can house their elderly parents in and still be able to provide care for them. So maybe that could be something as well when they're looking at that entire project down there, that it would be appealing. So on top of that, you could still charge your parents a little bit of rent, as opposed to them paying something to be somewhere else. So that actually helps you on your mortgage as well. And naturally, you wouldn't charge them what $1,500 a month, but if it's $700, $600 a month, that still knocks your mortgage down because you're able to finance it for 30 years as opposed to being 15 years or 20 on an investment piece of property that's going to have some sort of fluctuation rate. So that's great, Paul. Let me ask you another question.
Hang on before you leave there. I'm smiling because Daryl Piggy has grabbed me by the collar and showed me how I used to work in the Black community. And he showed me a development in Chicago where the lower level could be rented out. Okay. So the first floor was maybe 5, 6, 7 steps off the ground. And so the lower level was half in, half out. So it could be a rental. It could be grandma and grandpa, who knows. And then in the garage, there was a second floor over the garage. So you could get 2 to 3 rental pieces that help pay a mortgage for a single family house. Because for one African-American family in our community, be able to afford a mortgage on a single family house alone is tough. And that's one way of doing it, which is not necessarily the way our zoning laws are, but Daryl is all over that. So that's a concept that we want to figure out how to do here big time.
Yeah. And when you talked about zoning, Houston has no zoning laws like they have in other cities. So they are able to do a lot of stuff there, and which is one of the reasons that it's probably the fastest growing city in the country right now, because they don't have a lot of the governmental restrictions that say you can't do this and you can't do that, and they're really moving forward. So that's a great thing.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because I follow the Dallas Business Journal and watch that market pretty closely, and you're absolutely correct. It's I can't imagine what that's like to be in that kind of a environment. But,
we were just there over the holiday during the Christmas break. My son actually works with Cushman & Wakefield there. As director of retail for Cushman & Wakefield in Houston. So he's pretty well versed on the market there, and is kicking off a project on his own there. So I really like Houston, and I get a lot of great ideas when I go there. Springfield is a small market. It's 100,000 people here. So naturally, a lot of the things that would work in a city such as Houston would not work here, but they would probably work in St. Louis. So, and I know you have McBride and Sons Builder. They've been there for decades. I remember growing up in St. Louis and playing baseball there, and they, sponsored the team, McBride and Sons. I remember even back in the day, and they're a top class builder. But if they're interested, I'm sure being a builder where they don't have to take any risk, they can build the houses. But when you start talking about taking a risk, the line, like you say, you turn around and there's nobody behind you because of the risk that are associated. But operating in areas such as this. When you talk about this whole thing, have you seen, I guess you can say, a land grab in the adjacent areas outside, I guess, what you own, of individuals that are maybe speculating and saying, hey, this SPY center is here and I want to try to buy up blocks or buy up houses and to be able to hold on to them or be able to develop it once they feel this SPY project is complete?
No, sir. It's really surprising to me. It's I could speculate why, but when you see me drug through the newspaper 3 times a week, why would anybody want to come in and expose themselves to that kind of environment? Sort of just deters people. I lived a very nice 40-year career before I embarked on this without ever being in the newspaper. Now I can't seem to stay out of it. Yeah. And why would someone step into that kind of environment, Mike? So I think that's got a lot to do with it. Our city's got to be more welcoming to this kind of thing. and it's I mean more than just talk. It's got to act accordingly, and that's got to change. It really has to.
Well, what do you say to those critics? I know, and I've seen some of the articles in the paper, they're saying that Paul McKee has all these properties. He doesn't fix them. He doesn't take care of them. And you own, I don't know, a couple thousand properties or whatever. I get it because it costs a lot of money just to maintain them. And you're kind of waiting on, other things to take off to be able to take care of that. What do you say to those individuals?
Well, a couple things. Well, one is there's nobody behind me, So if not me, who, right? So that's fine. You can complain about it, but who else? The other thing is, where else in the United States has someone embarked on what we've done here? I've studied it all over. I've not seen it done anywhere. So we are really in some virgin territory. That's number two. Yeah. Number three is we've spent a ton of money in maintaining properties. We've probably demolished over 100 plus dilapidated homes. I got 140 something more to go, and that costs money. When the city had them, they were falling down. Nobody hollered at them about why they haven't taken them down. And here I've systematically been reducing them, but it costs a lot of money to come in and just willy-nilly do it. And then the other thing you have the historic commission that fights us on about it. 1 out of every 10 demo that they don't want you to demolish, even though it's fallen down or you have an engineering report about it falling down. So, they can complain. Could it have gone faster? Yeah. Could we have not had COVID? Because COVID just really hurt us in the market, in the C-store, and in the hospital. That period of time, the recession, I mean, you couldn't do anything for 3, 4, 5 years during the recession, yet we were able from 2012 to 2016 to win NGA, the largest project in the history of the city. We were able to pull off during that recession, which is friggin' phenomenal kind of thing, and we wouldn't have done it without the help of the state. So they keep trying to fit us for a coffin, but we're not going anywhere, Mike. We're going to just keep slugging her out every day.
Yeah. And I know it's a lot of work. It's a lot of, I can't imagine the amount of stress that this probably taking a toll is taking on your family, but just the mere fact that you're still hanging in there, I commend you for that. And again, to take all the body shots that you've taken over the years. I get it. I understand it. When we talked about the whole thing about the land grab and, surprising that people aren't actually, trying to buy properties up, what do you feel in terms of adding to the tax base? At what point do you feel like, okay, we've added to where you made a substantial addition to the tax base, that whereby people will start opening their eyes because now there's more money for the fire department, there's more money for the police department based on the tax base that's been created? Yeah,
what's fascinating there is 3,100 jobs, NGA coming in here. Nobody talked about the construction jobs and what they've created on the $1.75 billion of the project size that's been going on 3.5 years. The hospital the same way, the market, the jobs. I mean, the economic impact, Dr. Lenahan loves to talk about it. A graduate doctor has an annual economic development impact of $2 million per doctor per year once they're in practice. And he's going to be creating 125 doctors a year from the Homer G. Phillips Memorial Academic Healthcare Campus on the Pruitt-Igoe site. The fallout of that, but all of that has a time horizon to it, Mike. It's one thing to prepare the ingredients and to bake the cake and be ready to eat it. So it's happening over time. I think the city has to be careful not to give away too much of its benefits. We promise, for instance, to never let the school system get below where we started. Okay, and what they earn off of the properties we've purchased, and we've held to that. all the buildings we bought from the city, we've had to maintain, or the land we bought from the city or anybody else, we had to maintain and pay real estate taxes on it ever since. Albeit it's very, very difficult to do every year, and I'm always behind on it, but we eventually catch up all the time on it. But
Yeah, you
those
have no,
things
yeah, you have no,
alone are, you know
you
what
have no
that's
way
doing.
to, yeah,
No income, and you got to pay taxes and maintain,
yeah, you have no way to service the debt. I mean, again, it's other than to dig in your own pocket, which I'm sure that's something that you just don't want to continually keep doing. At some point, it's just a tough one. And again, I commend you for hanging in there, because most people probably would have threw in the towel and said, "Hey, here go the keys, come get this stuff, and I'm going to keep my nice little comfy house in the suburbs and let those people take care of themselves." So it's a commendable project. And then when you look at tearing down these structures, many of them have lead, many of them probably have asbestos in them, which actually runs the cost up considerably to be able to abate those items before you can tear them down, because a lot of them are probably 80, 90, 70, 80 years old, and they need to come down. And then when you're dealing with the historic nature of them, when I think about St. Louis and growing up in South St. Louis in the projects, and I look at what happened in Lafayette Square, growing up as a kid, that was the slums.
right?
That was the slums. We used to go down to a little place called Caroline Mission and play down there and stuff. But all these old Victorian style houses was the ghetto back then. Now you drive over there. Now you probably can't touch a house for under $500,000. And that whole community is turned around. So whenever you announced this project, the first thing that came to my mind was Lafayette Square. How do you create numerous Lafayette Squares in North St. Louis? And granted, because you have such a high African American Black population, when you're talking about 98, 99% of the total population of entire North St. Louis is probably Black, is Black, and has been Black for decades and decades. When you talked about having businesses within the Black community, prior to integration, a lot of these Black neighborhoods got knocked out because of the fact when they're prior to integration, you couldn't go in the suburbs and spend your dollars. So you had to spend your dollars within the Black community. Therefore, you had grocery stores, you had barbershops, you had theaters, you had dry cleaners, you had lending institutions that were basically within the Black community, whereby those dollars circulated. Once they with one hand, they kept hitting other hands, which created jobs and kept the economy going. So what happens that when the integration came, all your high income earners, your doctors, your dentists, those school teachers, they wanted to get out of quote unquote the hood, and they went to the suburbs, and it flattened a lot of the Black communities, because you took out a lot of the leaders, the income earners, and all you had left were low income individuals, and the tax base went down. So it's a problem not only in St. Louis but throughout the country to be able to revitalize these areas. So when I see individuals stepping out to revitalize predominantly Black areas, on top of that, I just have to have a heart for that, because I know how difficult it is to be able to do something like that, and especially for somebody white to go and take all their money and put it in the Black community. I know you say some of your friends thought you were crazy, but doing that, years ago, and I don't know very many other people that have done it to the scale that you have. So again, I commend and take my hat off to you. And speaking of, again, the Pruitt-Igoe area, what is the next shovel-ready project that you say that will probably come out of the ground over there outside of the governmental center itself? What's the next thing on the horizon, or do you feel could be next?
Well, the Pruitt-Igoe site is planned to be, the north half will be called GeoEnt Village, which is really meant to address the NGA in geospatial community, and the south half will be the academic healthcare campus of Pruitt-Igoe. So the hospital expansion will continue. And then we've got brownfields where we have to clean up we only cleaned up the front 14 acres of the 34 acres. So the rest of Pruitt-Igoe needs to be cleaned up environmentally, Mike. And then the med school, we'll relocate over there. We've got to build a new med school and parking garages and hospital, all of that has to do with an academic healthcare campus. That's going to continue. I mean, the hospital was the first piece. The medical school is temporarily located at Tucker and Market today, but eventually we'll be up here. And then on the north half, the first block will be, we call it the A block, will be a couple office buildings, a garage, and a hotel, a 200-room Marriott Delta hotel with a conference center. And then the third block will become another building for the NGA. And then we have a large industrial user that we want to bring up in what we call the STAR area, which is the science, technology, and applied research up by Sensient in the northwest quadrant. That is a big job producer. So we're working with a large job producer up there. Back to the one thing you said earlier, everyone likes to think that we caused the blight, but it was interesting is you just defined why blight is blight, right? In not just in St. Louis, but every community in America. But for some reason, people have in their head that we caused it, but I don't think so. It was here before we came. We just decided to do something about it, Mike. So I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, well, whenever you step to the front of the line, you know, you're always open for darts to get thrown at you. And I always say, if you're not doing anything, people don't have anything to say about you. So it's normally the leaders that step outside the box. And I don't even like to say box because you kind of box yourself in already, but kind of that are forward thinkers. And you were very successful prior to, you know, embarking upon this project. So it's not like this was your first rodeo and you knew how to do it. But again, you know, when you start talking about how the way things are done in the Black community versus how they're done in the white community, you know, the type of foods that we eat, the type of ways that we shop, or our cultural habits, you know, was something that, again, that you were totally oblivious to. And unfortunately, it's been a painful lesson for you. But nonetheless, you know, you've learned, and, you know, hopefully that you know, you can still move forward and make this thing happen, because I'm rooting for you, because I, you know, having grown up again in North St. Louis, and I know exactly what it's like there to be able to, you know, take those opportunities and chances. Now, in this particular developments that are taking place down there, I know I'm curious as to there been any mandates, if you will, in terms of making sure that Black businesses are involved in some of the construction or anything, the things that are happening down there.
Yeah, it's the minority participation on all the construction, that kind of thing is obviously mandated, and we've been able to live up with it. The hardest thing to live up with is the women-owned businesses. There just aren't enough of them around the construction industry. But on the minority side, we've been able to live with that, Mike, and do a good job there, to be honest with you. But what's really weird about that, the way everything is written, it's by a percentage of the dollars, not the percentage of the jobs. And we have offered that 1 out of every 4 jobs we create would go to somebody of the community. That's actually written into our agreement with the city. That's the hardest thing to do. But I'd love for you to come down and visit Homer G. Phillips Memorial Hospital. There are over 70 people working there today. Okay. Of that 70%, I'd say 90% of them are people of color. Of that 90%, 80% of those people have a relationship with the old Homer G. Phillips Memorial Hospital.
Wow.
They were either born there, their mom was born there, their dad worked there, or they babysat people that worked there. It's just unbelievable. So the nurses and docs and people that we have working there all have a relationship with the Farmer Hospital. So it's more than just about, you know, and Black people want to be cared for by other Black people. You know, I get it. And it's, no matter what, this race thing is an underbelly that still exists in our world, and we got to deal with it. And that's the only way we're going to get on top of it and make a difference. And if there's anything that you and I learned from DJ, you just got to keep punching, right? And punching back. And that's what we try to do here. The one thing I've got to make a comment about is, if it wasn't for our bank, the Bank of Washington, Missouri, the Eckelkamp family, this couldn't have happened. I mean, they have stood shoulder to shoulder with me, Mike, from day one down here. And you know how significant bankers are to real estate. It doesn't happen without bankers. Well, I've had a 50-year relationship with them, and they have stood with me the whole way. And it hasn't been pleasant for them either. They're not used to being drug in the newspaper like they have been either, which is really, really, really difficult for them. And I get it. And I'd like to make that go away, but that's very hard to do. So to not say it couldn't have been done, but for that, it couldn't have been done without a law firm, Steve Stone's law firm, who Steve, understands the community, and Daryl Piggy works there. And if it wasn't for him helping us interpret the community. And then the last thing is, we have some great friends within the Black community of the North Side. Nobody ever talks to them. If you go to a man on the street in the North Side and ask them about the Homer G name, they'll say, "What the hell's the matter with those people?" And look what we've done for the name because of the debate, which we're going to stand tall. We ain't changing the name. And because of that debate, many, many young people now know the Homer G story, which is a phenomenal story that needs to be told. And it wasn't talked about or understood for a long time. So.
Yeah. It's interesting. Probably just about 2 or 3 months ago, there's a documentary actually that's been produced on Homer G. Phillips. I was happened to run across and watch it. That was on, I think it was Amazon Prime that I had the opportunity to watch. And it really tells the story.
It does.
Of Homer G. Phillips Hospital. And I would probably behoove to even have a public viewing of that movie to let individuals know the history of Homer G. and the fact, this is something that of historical significance, I guess, because the only other thing being, if you didn't do it and there was no Homer G. Hospital there now, what would people say then? How do we keep the memory alive? So, do you say, okay, we're going to keep it alive? It might not be at the scale that it was when it was initially done, but at least there is some assemblage of it outside of, what's there now in terms of, I think it's a senior center now that they turned Homer G. Phillips into, the old Homer G. Phillips #2, if you will, which they've turned it into, which is not a hospital. It's senior housing now. So it is a big difference in that. And
or is anyone teaching people of color how to become a doctor?
Yeah.
All right. And there's some people that don't want us to bring this history back up, Mike. As you might imagine, right? So it's then you wonder why are people opposed to it, So
and you have some history as it relates to healthcare, because you were one of the founding members or the chairperson of BJC also at one time, is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I grew up as a board member of Christian Hospital up north, because my roots are in North County. And Overland is where I was born. And when we originally merged BJC, it was Barnes Jewish and Christian, and I came out of the Christian system and then eventually chaired BJC for 5 years. And we had a thing on the board where you aged out, and eventually aged out. And I haven't been a board member now for 6-7 years, I guess. But BJC is quite something I'm very, 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 very proud of in our community. It's something else, and it's been one of the most successful mergers, if you'd call it that, in the country. And it's just keeps cutting edge medicine here in our community, which is absolutely awesome.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I know we've been on this call for quite a while now, and I know you got some other things that you have to take care of. Is there anything else that you would like to say to our listeners that I didn't ask or that we talked about, that something that you want to say, or I can say get off your chest, if you will, that you would want to talk about?
Well, number one is if GJ were with us here, you still were the better athlete of the two of you. So he would not like me saying that, but yeah, you were better at baseball than he was at football. So, but I have to say that, right? But no, I appreciate the forum. It's and to be able to talk to you in a very frank method, and I've tried to be as outspoken as I can here. So you've given me a forum to say what I needed to say, and I greatly appreciate it, Mike. Thank you. Keep doing it.
Yeah, I think that's important because there's always two sides to the story. And I know how the press can be, once they get a hold of you, man, like a bulldog, and they just rip you apart. So, it's important, to be able to tell the other side of the story so people can make up their mind as to what they feel about a person or a project or a thing, because the first one to get it in writing is like, well, people say, hey, did you hear or did you read? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's always the gospel, if you will. So my last question, I'll say this, and then we can go in terms of the current political climate in St. Louis. There's a new mayor now and new administration and several new aldermen. There's been some individuals that have kind of got their hand in the cookie jar down there. So how is the political climate been in terms of for you and your project that's taking place down there now? Are they cold to you now, or are they new members that have warmed up to you, or are they hands off? Or I'm just curious in that regard.
Well, how can I say this? There's never been a good political environment for doing what we do in a community where race is the underbelly that nobody wants to talk about, Mike. So we got caught in that. But for the black alderman in St. Louis sticking up for what is right in the black community, I don't think we'd have been able to do anything over time. But we're now on our 3rd mayor. And there's a lot of young people in the organization that are trying to understand how to make development work. But that between the young people and the OG, that's a learning experience, right? So it's no, we've not been embraced, let's put it that way, by any stretch of the imagination. But we just keep going at our pace. It's never fast enough, but the idea is to try to continue to create something of value so we can explain to lenders that it makes sense and that we can create jobs, and it's something that can sustain, that's the only way I know how to do it. So unfortunately it's not going to happen in mass. It's got to happen in a process.
Yeah. And could you name the name of that bank again? I'd like to give them a shout out for them to stick in there with you through thick and thin. What was the bank again?
It's the Bank of Washington, Missouri, and it's led by L.B. Eckelkamp, who's a contemporary of mine. He's an OG as well in family, and his son Buzz Eckelkamp and Pete Eckelkamp, and they understand what we're trying to do, right? And they've hung in there, and boy, they've taken some shots. Really have taken some shots, and it's. I wish I could make that go away, man, of everything. You don't want to put your banker in an uncomfortable situation, but they've hung in there with me, Mike. They really have.
It means a lot to have a lender that understands and don't pick up and run and tell you to bring the keys, to cash in all your chips, and we're just gonna call this thing quits. So I take my hat off to a bank such as that's willing to step in even when they probably don't have to. I'm sure that's not the community that they would normally lend in to do things when you talk about Washington, Missouri. So I would, kudos to them as well and the leadership there. Well, Paul,
it really speaks to the idea of regional banks and people that live in the community and know what it takes to do things. So, there's a place for everyone, but we need more of that on the north side, Mike, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Paul, the next time I'm in that area, I'll try to reach out to you, give you a heads up. If I would like to take an opportunity to look at the Homer G. Phillips, as well as, maybe just drive around the site, the site down there and take a look and just look at the landscape down there, because I know it's changing. And did they ever knock down that Carter Carburetor building? Is it still up?
That's down. Yeah. Oh. Congressman Clay got some money to do that and to clean it up, and it's down. Yeah.
That's been an eyesore since I was a kid.
Right.
And talking a long time. So that actually, just helps to bring that area back as well. So that's great.
Mike, it'd be interesting for you to meet Karen Johnson, who's the chief operating officer, a woman of color who's been in the healthcare business for 32 years that runs Homer G. Phillips Memorial Hospital. It would be very interesting for you to have this same kind of time with her.
Sure. I'd love to have her on the show. I'd love to have her on to talk about it, because just to give a different perspective, and people will know. So, and this show will actually it'll be on Facebook, it'll be on YouTube, it'll be on LinkedIn. So everybody will get an opportunity to look at it and the link, and they can hear your side of the story. And again, I didn't want to just lob softballs at you, and I didn't want to beat you up, but I just wanted you to be able to, just talk about the things that are out there, which you didn't duck and dodge or hide from anything. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Yeah. And I know it took us a while to get together, and I know you're busy, but yeah, it was a great thing. So Paul, thank you so much. I'll end it right here. We can just stay on just a couple minutes afterwards and just kind of wrap up. So